You're tuned into the podcast Sentimental Journey, where discussions happen on the music of the World War II era. My name is Hollis Zimmerman, and I will be exploring this important time in music history. Hello, and welcome to Sentimental Journey. Today we're going to examine the music that the Allies listened to during World War II, focusing on the British, French, and Russian allies and their music. During World War II in the 1940s, there were another group of soldiers and countries who also served. The United States provided war material and monies to the Allies all along, and officially joined in December 1941 after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. In World War II, the chief Allied powers were Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, the United States, and China. More generally, the Allies included all the wartime members of the United Nations and signatories to the Declaration of the United Nations. In World War II, three great Allied powers, the Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union, formed a grand alliance that was key to victory. Together they opposed the Axis powers during the Second World War between 1939 and 1945. The alliance was formalized by the Declaration by the United Nations on January 1, 1942. After the war ended, the Allied states became the basis of the modern United Nations. The United States and all the other Allied countries during World War II came to the point to which desires of most people were in line of that of the leaders. This meant the American and British government could count on popular music reflecting on much of the same war aims that the government wanted. The people of America wanted a quick final victory over the Axis without compromise, and songs about a world after the war with peace, with boys coming home. Whether an instrument of blatant propaganda or as a means of entertainment, recuperation, and upliftment, music spread across homes and concert halls, army camps and government buildings, hospitals and factories. Music was appropriated for numerous war-related tasks, and indeed, more than movies, posters, books, and newspapers, music sounded everywhere in this war, not only in its live manifestations, but also through recordings and radio. World War II was the first conflict to take place in the age of electronically mass-distributed music. By 1940, 96.2% of northeastern urban households in the United States of America had radio. The lowest group to take up, southern rural families still had one radio for every two households. As the major powers entered war, millions of citizens had home radio devices that didn't exist after the First World War. Also, during the pre-war period, sound was introduced to cinema and musicals were popular. Therefore, World War II was unique for music and its relationship to warfare. Never before was it possible to not only single songs, but also single recordings of songs to be so widely distributed to the population, and never before had the number of listeners to a single wide performance been so high. And never before had the states had so much power to determine not only what songs were performed and listened to, but to control the recordings, not allowing local people to alter their songs in their own performances. First, I'm going to speak about the British, who were an Allied power active during World War II, along with the British music that made the impact during World War II and crossed into the United States. The main British artists included Vera Lynn, Gracie Fields, Jack Payne, Noel Coward, and Anne Shelton. Classical music was a primary genre that was still popular in Britain during the Second World War. The BBC's classical musical radio broadcast and other programming there were challenges and issues to the confront. Music raised issues by playing of works by enemy composers and the position of new music. During the war, to dismay of many pursuits, BBC Radio included many more gramophone record programs than would have ever been permitted before the war. Nevertheless, the main source of programs was the BBC orchestras, which regrouped as the wartime pressures permitted. bringing orchestral music to the music halls in a variety of major provincial cities, then suffering heavily under the bombings, have been a tremendously popular contribution to the war effort. Before the war, BBC Radio had quite an elitist approach to popular music. Jazz or swing or big band music for dancing was regulated to a few late night spots. During the war, the BBC was obligated to adapt, if only British soldiers were listening to German radio stations to hear their dance music favorites. The BBC establishment was reluctantly increased as the amount of dance music was played, but censorship was severe. The American hit Coming In on a Wing and a Prayer, for example, was censored because of its mixed religious words and a foxtrot melody. The BBC were also worried about the American-style crooners undermining the virility of British men. The BBC establishment tried hard to stick to the jaunty tone when they had felt to help to win the First World War. So George Formby and Gracie Fields were popular and were very much played on the radio. Britain did have a mass media which played popular music, much enjoyed over the Germans in France and Low Countries flying over Britain. Two of the most popular artists that were well known for their British harmonies and work during World War II was Vera Lynn and Anne Shelton. Vera Lynn was born in East Ham, Essex, England on March 20th, 1917. When she was 2 years old, she fell ill with diphtheric croup and nearly died. She was sent to an isolation unit and was discharged after 3 months there. As a result of her hospitalization, her mother was very protective of her and did not allow her to visit her friends or play on the street for a very long time afterwards. At the age of 7, Vera was singing in working men's clubs in East Ham, Essex, England. At the age of 11, she left school to join Madame Harris's Cracker Cabaret Kids, a singing troupe. After leaving school at the age of 14, Lynn was spotted by several big band records and began performing on the radio with the Joe Loss Cassini Club Band, and released her first solo recording, Up the Wooden Hill to Bedfordshire. In 1937, Lynn made her first recordings, The Little Boy That Santa Claus Forgot and Red Sails in the Sunset. Supposed herself working as an administrative assistant to help lead the shipping management in companies in London's East End. At the age of 18, she, having adopted her grandmother's maiden name surname, Vera Lynn was singing with popular big bands, and at the age of 20, she became the resident singer with the band leader Bert Ambrose, whose weekly radio program made her a household name. At the age of 22, Miss Lynn won the Daily Express's newspaper Force's Sweetheart poll in a landslide. In 1940, she began her own BBC radio show, Sincerely Yours, which was beamed to troops all around the world on Sunday nights right after the news. Lynn teamed up with band leader Benjamin Ambrose in 1937 and began performing on his radio program, Life from Mayfair. Vera Lynn's wartime contribution began when she would sing to people who were in London's tube station platforms as air raid shelters. She would drive in her Austin 7 car. Between 1937 and 1940, she also toured with the Ambrose Ensemble. The group appeared in broadcasts for the BBC and for Radio Luxembourg. Lynn is best known for her popular song We'll Meet Again by Ross Parker and Huey Charles. She first recorded it in 1939 with Arthur Young on the Novacord. The nostalgic lyrics, We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day, were very popular during the war. During the war, the Daily Express asked British servicemen to name their favorite musical performers. Vera Lynn came out on the top and as a result became known as the Force's Sweetheart. Her continuing popularity was ensured by the success of her radio program Sincerely Yours, which began airing in 1941 with messages sent to the British troops serving abroad. After the aftermath of the Singapore in February 1942, The program was taken off the air for 18 months out of fear that the sentimental nature of her songs would undermine the virile nature of the British soldiers. Instead, more traditionally martial classical music was promoted. Vera Lynn and her quartet continued to perform songs most requested by soldiers. Lynn also visited hospitals to interview new mothers and send personal messages to husbands overseas. In 1942, Vera Lynn recorded "There'll Be Bluebirds Over the White Cliffs of Dover." The song was written by Walter Kent and Nat Burton before the United States entered the war. Germany had been bombing Great Britain in 1940, the Battle of Britain. The song looked forward to a time when peace would regain again over the skies, over the cliffs of Dover, and another song that came to epitomize the sentiment of the war years. In 1943, she appeared in many films, We'll Meet Again and Rhythm Serenade. During the war years, she joined Entertainment's National Service Association and toured Egypt, India, and Burma, giving outdoor concerts for British troops. Between 1942 and 1944, she appeared in 3 movies with wartime themes. In March of 1944, she went to Schammerschnager Airfield in Begnal to entertain the troops before the Battle of Koshima. Lynn's Auf Wiedersehen Sweetheart in 1952 became the first record by a British performer to top the charts in the United States, remaining there for 9 weeks. Her popularity continued in the 1950s with My Son, a #1 hit in 1954, which she co-wrote with Gordon Melville Reeves. In 1955, Lynn began her first television series and radio and TV work and signed an exclusive contract with the BBC for 2 years. She appeared regularly on the Tulla Bankhead's radio program, The Big Show. Along with her many hits like The Homing Waltz and Forget Me Not, Lynn gave 3 entries on the first UK singles chart, after she became the first English artist to hit #1 on the American record charts. After leaving Decca in 1960 for EMI, Lynn continued to tour abroad. She performed less frequently, with developing emphysema toward the end of the decade through complications of her material, but still sold well. Another British artist who was popular during the troops during World War II was Anne Shelton. Born November 10, 1923, in Dulwich, South London, she began singing at the age of 12 on her radio show Monday Night at 8. By the age of 15, she had a recording contract. Shelton performed at many military bases in Britain during World War II. Her radio program, Calling Malta, was broadcast between 1942 and 1947. In 1944, she was invited by Glenn Miller to sing in France with him and his orchestra. She declined because of prior commitments. Miller died during his tour when his plane crashed. Shelton appeared with Bing Crosby on the Variety Bandbox radio program. In 1948, she recorded If I Ever Fall in Love Again, written by Irish songwriter Dick Farrelly, who is best known for his song Isle of Innisfree, which Shelton also recorded. Her songs Galway Bay and Be Mine were popular in the United States in 1949, and she toured there in 1951. She had a #1 hit song in 1956 in UK with Lay Down Your Arms, engineered by Joe Meek. She also had a top 10 hit in 1961 with her cover version of Sailor. In the same year, she participated in BBC Television's A Song for Europe contest, the UK qualifying heat for the Eurovision Song Contest. Her entry, I Will Light a Candle, was placed 4th. As well as singing and recording, Shelton appeared in several films, including Miss London Ltd., King Arthur Was a Gentleman, and Bees in Paradise. Shelton appeared in several royal variety programs. On occasion in her career, she was accompanied by her sister, Jo Shelton, also an accomplished and popular singer. I will tell you about the French Allies and their music during World War II. During World War II, the radio became a tool of immense political power with the French. By 1936, 4 million French citizens possessed a radio in their homes, with the choice of three main stations: the Tour Eiffel, Paris PPT, and Radio Paris, as well as smaller private and provincial stations. Some of the popular French artists during the 1940s of the World War II era, including Joseph Reinhardt, Quintess Francois, Stan Benders, Django Reinhardt, Gus Viseur, and Andre Econ. For the honor of the Republic and to give soldiers something to sing, a contest was held that brought in 484 war songs. 20 jurors winnowed the songs down to 20, which were sung for 10 days in the Paris public. One of the significant tools of the French resistance, yet one was which historically been overlooked partly because of the humility that was carried out, was the composition of many thousands of resistance songs. Resistance songs also played an important part of the liberation of France. Charles Hummel's Liberation Song, which was sung in the suburbs of Marseille on August 26, 1944, to calm the street fighting which broke out, and subsequently over 20,000 copies were published. In Vinci, the same song was played on August 17, 1944 by an orchestra of 140 musicians in the Park Bandstand by August 27th as the town was liberated. Many of the songs were sung in intimate groups of friends and passed around orally. A number of songs alluded to the past French military successes such as the Revolution, the Empire, the First World War, which others referred to the French heroes as Charlemagne, St. Louis, Henry V, and Richelieu. Above all, there is a presiding love of France with the recurrent patriotic symbols such as the flag, the Cross of Lorraine, and La Marseillaise. Many of the songs were sung in intimate groups of friends and passed around orally. This was an act of resistance, as the Nazis made simple possession of a resistant text as an illegal act. But others were written down and transported secretly in bags, posted in letterboxes, placed on public transport, or published in newspapers to publicize resistance efforts. After the war, many of the songs were published or recorded, and the FFI employed a number of the many songs of patriotic symbols of the new French army. The most popular French artist during World War II was Edith Piaf on December 15, 1915. She was named Edith after the World War I British nurse Edith Cowell, who was executed 2 months before Edith's birth, and for helping French soldiers escape from German captivity. Piaf's slang for sparrow was a nickname she received 20 years later. Piaf's grandmother abandoned her at birth, and she lived for a short time with her maternal grandmother, Emma. When her father enlisted with the French army in 1916 to fight in World War I, he took her to his mother, who ran a brothel in Bernay, Normandy. In 1929, at the age of 14, she was taken by her father to join in his aristocrat street performances all over France, where she first began to sing in public. At the age of 15, Piaf met Simone Berthaud, who may have been her half-sister and may have been a companion for most of her life. Together, they toured the streets and singing and earning money for themselves. In 1935, Piaf made her theatrical debut, and within a few weeks she was singing in large music halls of Paris. Initially, her material was standard music hall fare, but eventually she had songwriters such as Margaret Monod and Mitchell Emmer writing songs especially for her. In the mid-1940s, she began a mentor with young Yves Montand and worked with him in the film Étoile sans lumière, meaning star without light. In 1940, she co-starred in Jean Cocteau's successful play Les Belles Indifferentes. In 1947, she wrote the lyrics to the song Mais qu'est-ce déjà? She contributed greatly to revolutionizing the cabaret genre. During this time, she was in great demand and very successful in Paris as France's most popular entertainer. After the war, she became known internationally, touring in Europe, the United States, and South America. At first, she met with little success with the American audiences, who expected a gaudy spectacle and were disappointed by Piaf's simple presentation. After a glowing 1947 review by the New York Herald Tribune, influenced by New York critic Virgil Thomson, himself a contributor to the New York Herald Tribune, and himself a contributor to an international avant-garde culture, her popularity grew to the point where she eventually appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show 8 times and at Carnegie Hall twice. Piaf wrote and performed her signature song, La Vie en Rose. In 1945, Piaf's career and fame gained momentum during the German occupation of France. She performed in various nightclubs and brothels, which flourished during 1940 to 1945. She lived above the El Lote del Kleber, a famous nightclub, and eventually her life and career went downhill, and she sadly passed away at the age of 47. During the 1940s, the French Allies not only had their music controlled by the French government operations, they had their radio controlled as well. A radio service called Radio Londres set up and launched on June 18, 1940. Radio Londres broadcasted from the BBC in London, and it was operated by the Free French who had escaped German occupation. It served not only to counter the propaganda broadcast or the German or Vinci controlled radio stations, but also to inspire the French to rise up. The first broadcast, given by Charles de Gaulle, is considered to be the origin of French resistance. One of the most important features of Radio Londres was the focus on the music. Some French songs were written in England and broadcast on Radio Londres, such as Le Chant des Partisans, the Song of the Partisans, sung by Anna Marley, and La Chanson des Maquis by Maurice Van Mops and Francis Chagrin. Les Chants des Partisans became the most popular song of the Free French and the Free French resistance during World War II. It was written and put to melody in London in 1943 after Anna Marley was inspired by a Russian song. The lyrics of Les Chants des Partisans revolve around the idea of a life or death struggle for national liberation. After the war, Le Chant des Partisans was so popular that it proposed a new national anthem for France. It became short, while the unofficial national anthem, second only to La Marseillaise. Others were written in France and sent to London, such as the Hymn of Resistance by Marcel Salin, The Friends of the Maquis by Blanche Gabriel, and the Song of the Resistance by Jean Notcher. This radio station became a lifeline to people in France, reminding them that others that were in spirit of them. Another French radio station that was significant during World War II was Radio Paris. In occupied Paris, music was equally important for the radio propaganda, but on an even greater scale, and for anti-theatrical purposes. About half of the daily output, Radio Paris was devoted to music, including a program called The Rhythm of Rhyme, which from March of 1942 adapted the famous songs for propaganda. The principal music DJ was Pierre Hegel, who from the summer of 1940 until the liberation presented concerts and recordings. He became the most popular voice on French radio. Not only his programs alluded to the political affairs, there is no evidence that he was involved in the collaboration. In fact, contrary to the wishes of the station director, Major Schimke, who wanted to use German music to convince people of the superiority of German culture, Hegel played primarily French composers. Finally, I'm going to wrap up this podcast on the music that the Allies listened to with the Russian Allies music. A lot of the popular Russian songs were originated and were influenced by opera and classical music, with songs like Katushka, Blue Kerchief, The Sacred War, and Dark as the Night. The classical music of the Soviet Union developed from the music of the Russian Empire. It gradually evolved from the experiments of the revolutionary era, such as the orchestras with no conductors, toward classicalism under Joseph Stalin's office. Russian music went along history, beginning with ritual folk songs and the sacred music of the Russian Orthodox Church. The 19th century saw the rise of the highly acclaimed Russian classical music. The Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 came as a complete surprise to the Soviets. Stalin's administration was forced to react quickly and devote all resources into the war effort. As a result, Soviet music witnessed a relaxation of restrictions on expression. This period was a break from the policies of the 1930s. The Communist Party, seeing as it was allied with several Western powers, focused on patriotic propaganda rather than anti-Western rhetoric. With a restored connection to the West, Soviet music experienced a new waves of progressionism and experimentation. One of the most well-known songs, Katushka, is close to the melodic, rhythmic, and harmonic structures of Russian romantic songs of the 19th century. It was an adaptation of folk motifs to the theme of soldiers during wartime. Russia was a late starter in developing the native tradition of classical music due to the prescription of the Orthodox Church against secular music. Many of the most frequently performed songs in Soviet Russia came from international revolutionary movement in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. A noteworthy example was Varnishka Bianca, which was originated in Poland and popularized with the Russian Revolution. The song is characterized by an intense rhythm and calls to bloody battle, holy and righteous. There was also the song The Red Banner, which originated in France. One of the most commonly known songs is Boldly Comrades in Step and the funeral march You Fell Victim. It was based on the principles of socialist realism and formed under the immediate control and sponsorship of the Soviet state and Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Russian radio during World War II era in the 1940s was controlled by the Soviet Union government, and they were spending great sums of money on radio development. A number of laboratories was set up to enhance broadcasting and receiving techniques. And around 1920, a group of Soviet scientists were able to transfer the human voice into radio waves. In 1921, using the new technology, a powerful station was set up to broadcast every day for a few hours. The new program was called Spoken Newspaper of the Russian Telegraph Agency, which featured mainly news and propaganda material. Because radio receivers were still expensive and unavailable for private use, sets of loudspeakers were installed in places of public gathering, which made the spoken newspaper available and accessible to people. As the radio increased, the government did its best to secure the authority over radio development in the country. Stations carried news provided by the government as well as a considerable number of music and cultural programs. There was virtually no light of entertainment. By the early 1930s, the Soviet government was exerting tighter control over station operations and content, but perhaps ironically providing more entertainment. During World War II, radio took on a strongly patriotic tone, continuing with music and news as well as government propaganda messages. I think it's harsh how some of these allied countries like Russia and the French had their own radio stations and listenership was restricted and owned by the government. The music restrictions on the radio and the different styles of French, Russia, and British are also unique in their own way, and some of the artists did get involved during World War II, but there were a lot of restrictions with the music and the radio. There are still corporate-owned radio stations today, and we still have government restrictions by the Federal Communications Commission, but times have changed since World War II. I'm interested in exploring more of the music and learning more about the radio broadcasting in the Russian, French, and British allies. Well, today we've explained the music that the Allies listened to during the World War II era of the 1940s and how it's impacted the war efforts with the British, Russian, and the French Allies during World War II. You can find us on social media at Sentimental Journey. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.